Welcome to Film Forum Presents, a podcast featuring special live events recorded at our theater located at 209 West Houston Street in downtown Manhattan. In this episode, Film Forum presents Joan Tewkesbury, screenwriter of Robert Altman's epic Nashville. On Saturday, September 21st, 2019, Ms. Tewkesbury sat down for a conversation with Film Forum Repertory director Bruce Goldstein, immediately following a sold-out screening of the movie. The dazzling new 4K restoration of Nashville runs at Film Forum through Thursday, September 26th. And now, here's Bruce to introduce the episode.
Nashville is one of those rare movies. It was an instant hit the moment it was released in June 1975, and it's remained a Repertory cinema staple ever since. In 1992, only 17 years after its first release, we ran a new 35mm print for a 2-week run, and it was a huge hit all over again. Now, 27 years after that, we're unveiling a new 4K restoration from Paramount Pictures. It never looked or sounded better. This current reissue of Nashville gave me a chance to sit down with the delightful Joan Tewkesbury, who wrote both Nashville and Thieves Like Us for Robert Altman. Joan began her career as a dancer, and during the interview, I cue a clip from the 1960 television spectacular Peter Pan, in which she danced the part of an ostrich, choreographed by no less than Jerome Robbins. At the end of the interview, I cued a clip from Altman's The Player, with Joan in a cameo as a screenwriter co-pitching an idea to producer Tim Robbins. Because Nashville ends with a 5-minute credit roll and exit music, we were already sitting on stage when the spotlight hit. And now here's the Q&A.
Here she is. Screenwriter Joan Tewkesbury. I told you we didn't want to cut the end credits, and I didn't want to cut the exit music because Bob would be turning over whatever. There was a reason they wanted end music like that. Okay. Oh, well, it's anyway. No, I would have given you a grander entrance, but I didn't want people to be waiting around. It's so great to have you here. First time, I think. It's been at least 3 weeks since I've seen you.
I'm grateful. So grateful.
Well, we're grateful to you.
Thank you.
This was not your first
No.
screenplay for Bob.
Thieves Like Us.
Thieves Like Us.
Yeah.
How did you first meet Bob? We call him Bob.
Yes, we do. Bless his heart. Bob came to see Michael Murphy in a play that I had directed. And he was complimentary. And at the time, Bob had an office in Westwood where people sort of came in and out. It was very casual. I took the opportunity then Murphy took me to see him in MASH. And I thought, that's what I want to do. And so I took the opportunity, since he had been complimentary, to go to his office and say, may I shadow you or follow you? And he said, well, if you do that, I don't let anybody come on set without a job. And so I want to use the script girl from Canada as one of the hookers in McCabe and Mrs. Miller. You can hold script. And I thought, really? I had worked in a film when I was 10. I knew what the script person did.
You were in Sid Charise's film debut.
Yes.
What was it called?
The Unfinished Dance.
I'll tell you about that later.
Okay, good. Margaret O'Brien, Sid Charisse, and it was Danny Thomas's first film, too.
Right.
At any rate, Bob was not impressed with my credits. I had, I told her I had worked with Jerome Robbins and Peter Pan. He was still not impressed. He said, you got to have a job if you're going to do this. So I became the script girl. I was the worst script person in the entire
Could you tell them, they used to
world.
call it a script girl.
Yes,
they call it a
terribly
script supervisor now.
I know.
But could you tell everyone what a script supervisor does?
You have to keep track of every frame of footage. In case something goes wrong, you are the one.
You
who
have to
is-
match
You
shots.
have to match shots. You have to do. Well, Bob never matched shots.
Exactly.
Bob. It was always on the move, And one of his editors is here tonight,
Susie Elmiger, who
And-
cut shortcuts and worked on, I think, every film until the end.
Yes, till the end. But at any rate, I spent the summer with Lou Lombardo. He was editing Brewster McCloud. And so I got a feeling for the casualness of Bob's approach. And then when I got to Canada and walked in the office, he looked up and said, "Who are you?" And I thought, oh, shit. We then went through the process of how he worked with script, which was Warren Beatty wrote. Actually, Bob Town was writing stuff for Warren. For McCabe. And Julie had a young woman that was working with her for her stuff. And Bob was working on stuff because he didn't like the script, per usual. And what I began to see was that Bob's world really had to do with creating a place of character, and then the choreography of letting people have space for behavior, because Bob really cast for behavior more than, it didn't matter if you were famous or not famous, or if he needed a dentist, he'd hire a dentist. So
He didn't audition actors.
no, no, he didn't. No, you'd go out to dinner, which is nice, free dinner. No, at any rate, by the end of this very long process, I think we started in September and ended the end of January. And Bob said, nobody's going to let you direct. He said, you're going to have to write something. So I wrote a black comedy about the end of my marriage. And Bob said, okay, I'll produce it for you. In the meantime, have you ever adapted a book? And that is how Thieves Like Us...
Which is based on a novel, quite different from Nashville.
Yeah,
which
very.
was written from scratch.
Yes. And then when we got to Mississippi and we were shooting, and he said, do you know anything about country western music? I said, no. He said, would you like to? I said, why not?
He didn't know anything about country music
he
either.
Really didn't
and
know it.
He actually hated it.
He did hate it. And it sort of has a resonance of that if you listen to some of the lyrics, which did not delight the people in Nashville. But there was enough of other things that were quite beautiful to go around. I went to Nashville the first time, and I was taken on a tour, so I saw the Bible printing business, Patsy Cline's hairpins. It was, how you say, a restrained tour. I said, Bob, I have to go back on my own. So I was Opal from the BBC. I would walk in.
Except not so ditzy. Not a ditzy at all.
Bless her heart.
Yes.
Geraldine was such a gift to us. We had seen her when Thieves Like Us went to the Cannes Film Festival. She was at that point in time with Carlos Sara.
Right.
And so everybody, as she walked, there would be somebody with the microphone, as she does to Elliot Gould in the movie. And we said, Geraldine, be yourself. I could not write what Geraldine said. The buses, the cars, the directness of how she said, there's Elliot Gould. She was absolutely splendid, and she was the absolute perverse sense of Bob throughout the whole movie.
And in case you didn't get it, she really was not with the BBC.
No.
But in the original cut, the first cut was twice as long.
Yes.
And at one point, they were thinking of releasing 2 movies, correct?
Right, wrong. It was a bad idea.
But they never did it.
It's a single story without ever telling a single story. And so there's a lot of stuff. But if it doesn't compact and come together, it's a huger mess than it is now. So it after testing and when you approach Bob with something that you really thought was a terrible idea, you had to say, don't you remember the really great idea you had a week ago? And then you'd sort of fill, and then he was not dumb. He knew what you were doing, but he got the picture. And so gratefully, it was not 2 movies. There was only enough. For one.
Oh, 24 characters, yeah. But originally you had 18 characters.
Yes,
So
yes.
how did you go about writing? I don't know of any other movie that has tells so many stories or has such a large ensemble cast. I think this is the biggest ever.
Oh no, he there's Pret-a-Porter, there's
Well, but they're not
that-
quite the same. The player is a big
big,
panorama,
yeah,
but
but-
it's most of the people are cameos, as
Yeah,
I
that's-
remember it.
yeah, they do.
You know,
They
it's
come
not
and they
this.
go.
Yeah.
No, each character had a full storyline. And they were given full storylines, and then the actors and I would meet maybe a few days before they were going to shoot, and Barbara Baxley came with 11 pages of script for herself regarding Bobby Kennedy and the whole Kennedy speech. So we worked to compress it to a point, but basically she pretty much shot everything that she had written, and then it was edited down. Keith was very nervous about playing this character. He hated it.
He hated the character.
And I said, too bad, babe. I said, the essence of that character is the insecurity of the character. And it's interesting as I watch this thing, now for 4,000 years ago, to watch the sensitivity of those actors take you on their own personal journeys while this huge other political agenda is going on, and it's going on now, and the resonance is sort of
We're still
odd.
feeling this, yeah.
Yeah.
Murdering a celebrity was unheard of in those days.
Absolutely. Barbara
And-
Streisand was so angry with Bob because she said, "This is what I fear every time I walk on stage." And now, of course, we are becoming inured to what's going on.
5 years later, John Lennon was
Yes.
killed, murdered,
Yes,
and Bob got a call from the Washington Post
yes. We all did.
saying,
Yeah.
"You're responsible for this.
Totally.
Don't you feel responsible
yes,
for this?"
Yes, you would. Every time one of these things would occur, because they were rare, you would get a phone call about, "You've created this."
So you originally had 18 characters, and to keep track of them, how did you keep track of all these characters?
Well, it was like you put up a rug, or like you were going to weave a rug. And so this thing takes place in 7 days. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, then all the characters went down the side. And I had to see every single character every single day so you wouldn't lose track of them. So each of their stories, their personal stories, etc., those were created for them. And then it was just a matter of weaving so that, like with Jeff Goldblum, he was so wonderfully strange that you only needed a hit of Jeff. Oh yeah, that guy, So you didn't have to know his personal story, but it was imperative that you not lose track of any of them, because if you did, then it's just cameos, So
So
it was a rug.
some of the characters were based on people you had seen
Yes.
on that road trip. In
Yeah.
fact, the first scene in the traffic jam was something you saw on
I
your
was
first.
in.
You were in
I
that
mean,
jam.
I
yeah.
was in that traffic. I was in that mess as you came into Nashville. And then other characters were based, the Suline Gay character is based on a woman. I worked in nightclubs as a dancer, and she was based on a friend of mine who always thought she was going to be famous and she would never have to take off her clothes. That became, for me, that was the metaphor of the whole movie, that at some point in time, you have to take off your clothes. Whether you ever thought you were going to or not, you take off your clothes. The character that Lily played was really based on Louise Fletcher. And Louise was to do that character, only Milos cast her in Cuckoos. One Flew
in which
Over
she
the
got the
Cuckoo's.
Oscar for.
Yes.
And she had been in Thieves Highway.
Yes.
But it was based on her because
Yes, because her parents were deaf. So we reversed it and made her the character's children deaf, and the fact that the father did not know, Ined didn't know what to do with those kids.
This was Lily's first movie. It's
Yep.
hard to believe. She's
Yep.
so good in it.
Yes.
And also, she had come from this god-awful television show, as did Henry Gibson.
they all came
Laughing. It was the
Yes.
worst show. Even at 15,
no,
I
it wasn't.
hated it.
Oh,
But
It was great.
they're
I
so
thought-
fantastic in this.
Yes. And Bob cast
Yeah.
them because he knew he would get the television audience. Bob was a clever devil. He was always in business.
So you gave Bob a first draft of the script, and what
Yes,
did he say?
He hated it. He hated it. And Tommy Thompson was his co-producer, producer, first AD, Bob Eggenweiler. These are men that he had worked with forever. So I made sure they got copies too. They loved it. They said, Bob, come on. And what really made Bob mad was he said, well, I wrote a thing like that. I said, oh, I got it. Okay, fine. So then he sort of said, okay, I like it. And I said, okay. And then the political line was added after.
The assassination was not in your script,
No, it was not. And I was horrified.
as was Polly Platt.
Oh, Polly Platt was supposed to be the production designer, and Polly said, "You're out of your mind." And she took a hike. I loved Polly Platt. She was deeply perverse, but wonderful. So as we both knew more about, I knew more about Nashville, Bob knew more about his agenda with the politics. And so the second draft of this script was hideous because it was this really bad marriage of mine and the new characters. So I went back to Nashville and took another trip. I met Norman.
Norman, the
the
chauffeur, the only Jew you
And,
met in Nashville,
yes.
I heard. Yeah.
Yeah. Norman was fabulous. Norman took me all over Nashville. He talked a lot about, because he'd lived there his whole life, and it was true. When he says, write yourself a hit, why are you still here? I'm stuck. And he was. At any rate, then it began to weave better. It wove together better.
You once said that Nashville in the 70s was like Hollywood in the 40s.
Totally. I grew up in California. My mother desperately wanted me to be Shirley Temple.
Real stage mother.
Oh, bless her heart. And I hated it. And it was the same thing. Everybody in Hollywood was trying to put their kid in the movies, or they were a movie extra. Catherine Altman had been an extra on Bob's Whirlybirds.
Right.
I mean, everybody at that time, we were coming out of the Depression. It was a great way
I
to
thought
make
Catherine
money.
was the costume wardrobe mistress. Whirlybirds was a TV show Bob directed in the 50s.
She was an extra,
Oh,
and she
okay.
was playing a nurse.
She was
'cause
also on Combat and
Yes.
The Millionaire
Mhm.
also, I think.
I think Bob's opening line to her was, how are your morals? Catherine replied, shaky, how are yours? She was quick.
I love showbiz. So you were one of Meglin's kiddies?
Yes, I was.
If you know who Meglin, they were the worst, weren't they?
They were the worst.
Yeah. They were little, every girl who wanted to be Shirley Temple.
It was awful. You took ballet, acrobatics, and tap, and then you took personality.
But the fact that you got into an MGM movie with Margaret O'Brien, that was a big, big deal.
Well, then, see, Ernest Belcher was
Oh,
Marge's
Marge's
father.
father, yeah.
He was teaching ballet, and my mother was convinced that I had to leave Meglin Kiddies. MGM came with David Lachine, and they watched kids' ballet classes, and I'm sure it was because of the connection with Marge. They hired him out of his dance studio.
So you knew her father, Ernie Belcher?
Yes.
Really?
Yes, I
I know
studied
Marge.
ballet.
She's still with us. She's 100.
Oh, God love her.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I want to take a little segue here from Nashville. You worked with Jerome Robbins,
Yes.
right? Now, that's quite a thing just to have worked with Jerome Robbins on a show that someone of a certain age, like me, remembers so fondly because it was on every year
Yes.
as a special event.
Yes.
It would be repeated every year. You first did it in 1955
Yes.
in black and white. It was filmed in Brooklyn at
Yes,
Avenue M
it was
Studios, the
fabulous.
old Warner
Yes,
Brothers
yes.
Vitaphone Studios.
Yes.
And then they redid it in color.
Yes.
Well, I have a clip from it. I want to
Are
show
you
you.
kidding?
Why don't you go over there, and we'll change seats after that. I want you to see Joan in Peter Pan, choreographed by Jerome Robbins. And I hope they'll still be friends after this. We have a mutual friend named Sandra Lee
Yes, we do.
who played Tiger Lily.
Sandra's that tall.
Yeah, she is very tiny, yes.
Yeah.
But you were Mary Martin's, we'll get back to Nashville, don't worry. But you were Mary Martin's understudy
I was
also.
her
So
flying understudy.
that's quite, and it was not easy to fly with those wires.
It was fun.
Oh, really?
It was so much fun. Yes, they don't test the flying apparatus on the Star, and so I came to the auditions for Jerry in Los Angeles, and I went through this whole process. And then he said, "You're too tall." And so I went home. I thought, okay, that's it. And I was just out of high school. And then 2 or 3 days later, they called and said, you have to come back because the girl he hired can't count. That's essential for Jerry. It ended up that I was about the same body type as Mary. So I became the person that tested all the wires with Peter Foy. Peter Foy's family had, his father invented this whole rig for the first Peter Pan.
The first, this
In
production?
London, no,
No,
in
the one
London.
with Cyril
Yes.
Richard, not Cyril,
No.
the
W- it-
Boris Karloff.
From the very beginning of time. The first
Oh, you
time
mean
it
the
was
first
ever-
Peter Pan,
first
the
Peter
19th
Pan.
century.
So the family was in the flying business.
Like the
And-
Grucci family in fireworks, yeah.
And the last time that we did it, which was 1960, Vincent Donahue directed it.
Right.
And the stage was the length of 2 football fields. The floor was painted with clouds. There was a scrim with twinkling lights. And man, you got to fly from one end of that sucker to the other. It was fabulous.
They just tore that studio down
Oh.
like 2 years ago. It was
Too
the
bad.
oldest
It
movie studio
it was
in the
wonderful,
world, I
yeah.
think, Vitagraph
Oh, it was
Studios.
fabulous.
Well,
Yeah.
but then you had an accident.
I did. Yes, I was in an automobile accident and crushed this kneecap, and so I'm very grateful I'm not Catholic. There's been I don't have a kneecap on that knee.
Wait a minute,
That's-
what is, I'm sorry, I'm of a different,
Huh?
oh, kneeling, I get
Kneeling, oh, yeah. Not keening, kneeling. Yeah.
you. Okay, get it.
Okay.
All right, would you like to take some questions from the audience?
Sure,
Okay, it could be about
please.
Peter Pan if you want.
Don't be shy. Yes.
I'm curious about when the actors came into it, like when you were writing, creating, the kind of skeleton structure, whatever. Were specific actors being thought of, or did that come later? And then they assumedly brought a lot of material with them.
I usually have somebody in mind, and Bob and I had done a lot of talking. We knew that Keith would be in it. Keith would mean that Christina Raines would be in it because they were a couple, and there was a trio. So I knew that piece of casting. We thought that Louise Fletcher would be Linnea. The humanity in that was really, thanks to Louise, a lot of what she had brought to Thieves Like Us. Barbara Harris was a complete surprise. Susan Anspach was to play Barbara Jean, and then she decided that, or her husband decided that Bob wasn't paying enough money. He never paid enough money. Bob's idea was that everybody sort of got a flat rate across the board, except for Bob. So
Karen Black was a big star, did she?
Karen was a very big star, but she got
She got the same.
She got the same.
Also, Gary Busey was supposed to play
Gary
Keith's
Busey
part.
was supposed to, no, he was to play the other part of the trio. He went off to do a football movie for television. And the three of them were pretty terrific when you saw the three of them together. But that didn't work out. But the beauty of Bob was that he had, thank God, he had a sense of humor, and he was smart, and he was perverse, and he was also flexible. So if one thing didn't work out, he could move on. You know, sometimes it pissed him off, but then he would certainly move on. So it was a great lesson in having come from the dance world where everything was rigorous and absolutely set in stone. And then to go to work with somebody who would see that you look the way you look, and so, come on, I want you to be in this movie. That was pretty good. It was fun.
The assassin character is really scary in terms of how much he seems to prefigure just in the way he looks and his mannerisms and everything else. I'm curious how that performance and that character developed.
He was the plainest actor that you ever could have imagined. I don't know who else if Bob even saw anybody else. I think that he was brought to Bob through a casting process, not auditioning again, just coming in. And the look of him was really what had happened previous to this in terms of any kind of assassination in broad daylight was the Texas guy in the tower that shot. And there was a resonance in terms of look to this young man. And he was the sweetest soul. I kept saying, Bob, why? And he said, no, you figure it out. And so the actor and I talked for a long time about, his history and where it was going. And, no, he didn't kill her because he hated his mother. It wasn't that. I said, you decide what you want it to be, and you don't have to tell anybody, So he didn't. And we just simply clocked him so that you saw him, because what I really had hoped for, that you would think that the Scott Glenn character was the assassin, because he was always there. And so then at the very end, you see that it wasn't. Bob made it more pointed than I had it in the script. You really didn't see it until after the shot, and then you saw the two men together. But he was a divine performance, because of what he established for himself.
Was that your voices, his mother? It was. And you were also Keith's girlfriend on the phone.
So just everything.
And you were you a hooker in McCabe?
No.
Oh, you were? Oh, that's
no, I wasn't.
Urban legend, yes.
Yeah.
You did write a lot. Yeah.
No, I was in a scene with Warren in the very
Oh, you're in it?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm in it. Yeah. Yeah.
You get residuals, I take it.
Oh, yeah. $1.
So you did write a lot of subtext that wasn't used for the actors to work with. Yep. Barbara Baxley's wonderful Kennedy speech, but originally in one cut, Opal had said something.
Opal said at the end of it, and it was cut out, and when they published the screenplay, I put it in. And so Barbara goes on and on about how divine Bobby Kennedy is. And at the end of the speech, Opal turns to her because she's getting angrier and angrier. And she says, what about Cuba?
What about the Bay of Pigs?
What about the Bay of Pigs? What about
Which
Cuba?
Changes the whole tenor of the scene.
It certainly did. And so Bob took it out. So I loved
you're
it.
Still pissed, right?
Yeah.
How did you get Ronnie Blakely? How did that develop?
That happened because Susan Anspach, she and her husband decided that she wouldn't do it. And Richard Baskin had been working with Ronnie. Ronnie was writing songs. And she was working with Richard a lot, and a lot of the information in the songs was about developing the character of what Susan Anspach would play. And when that happened, Richard just brought her into the office and introduced her to Bob, and she sang, and we all died. I mean, she was incredible. We took her story. She was badly burned as a kid, so that became part of the storyline for Barbara Jean. But it's literally because Richard Baskin was terrific, and we were at USC together in the theater arts department, and I didn't know that Richard was going to do the music until we both got on a plane to go to Nashville, and it was a nice surprise. But he was terrific about that. He worked with all of these. He worked with Henry Gibson. He wrote those dumb lyrics. Oh God! I mean, what is the one about the divorce? I have to.
Well, he wrote "Keep a Going."
3 reasons why. I mean, you listen to it and you just go, "Oh, you've got to be kidding."
Whose idea was it to have the Richard and the actors write the songs? Not.
It was Bob's, and Bob just. He said, these people write their own music, and Richard kept saying, really? They do. They're songwriters. But no, Bob decided that. And the great thing about Henry, he was incredibly astute politically. And so he knew where to make the turns. He was very, very, very smart and very willing.
I read that Bob did it purely for budgetary reasons. It would have been too expensive to use real country western stars.
That's part of it.
And he didn't want any country western prima donnas,
No.
or whatever the male equivalent is.
I know.
And he got his own prima donnas, though,
Yes, he
because
did.
I don't mind dishing a little dirt here. Ronnie was not too...
Ronnie was not, but the real
You fill in the rest. Yeah.
the real trouble was with Barbara Harris.
Really?
Yeah, that part was not cast. And I took the character of, she called herself Albuquerque, to be how you would survive if you came to Nashville and how you would do it. So she slept in a car that was by the side of the road. She went to church picnics. This is how she fed herself. And Barbara had a tendency, because we didn't want to hear her sing until the last scene, she'd had a scene where she was in a recording studio. And we thought we lost her. She didn't show up. The call was at 7 a.m. or whatever, and she wasn't there. And at noon, she came in, and Bob was ready to kill her. And that's when he cut out the scene. But it was the smartest thing he ever did, because it saved the performance for the very end.
He didn't get along with Alan Garfield either.
Nope. And I love Alan in this movie.
You were at the Actors Studio with him.
Yeah. And he was, he was so willing to be a prick. It was just terrific. Because I had worked with Mary Martin and her husband, Richard Halliday, there was this bond between the two of them. And so I took that and it's that way a lot of times for husband and wife, performer, manager. And so I just took the Hallidays and put it on them.
It could have been a sitcom. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was a talk of a Nashville sequel that you weren't going to write.
Bob wanted to turn it all dark, really dark. And
It's pretty dark now, I think.
Well, it's pretty dark, yes. But he wanted all of these people to have been losers. And someone else, I can't remember the fellow's name that wrote the script, because I said, Bob, leave it alone, and he was going to do it. So someone wrote the script, and I know Scott got it, Lily got it, one other actor got it, and they said no.
Originally, Sulene, you had her...
She killed herself.
But I'm glad you didn't do that.
No, we didn't. It was I said, Bob, does somebody have to die? Because in every movie, somebody had to die. He said yes. And so on the first draft, she led you there. But I'm very glad we didn't.
I think she's the most touching character,
She is.
even more so
Yeah,
than
she's-
Barbara Jean.
Oh, yeah. No. Gwen Wells was the most willing actress I've ever known. And, I said, look, you're going to have to be buck naked. Oh, she wanted to take singing lessons. And we said, no.
No one
No.
can act that.
No. And that's the way she sang. And she was living with Richard Perry at the time. And he, of course, being a music producer, was going to, and we said, leave it alone. When we shot that scene, the whole morning was spent doing the music. We had to give away television sets and a free trip to Disneyland to get those men to come, because it was a little dodgy. And so, but they came. And so we spent the whole morning doing the music. And at lunch, one of them came up, or two of them came up and said, you are going to dub her voice, aren't you? And I went, no. And they said, God, and they said his line, she cannot sing a lick. And I said, yes, this is true. In the afternoon, it was 2 cameras, 2 takes. And it ran the full length of the take ran the full length from start to finish of that when she finally takes off her clothes. At the end of every take, those men stood up and gave her a standing ovation. And it was so touching. And Ned Beatty was very concerned about that scene. He said she would have come prepared. I said if she was prepared to do it, she wouldn't have put stocks in her bra.
And that was her idea, Gwen's idea.
And that was Gwen's idea. And I said, It was interesting because he was convincing Bob. And Thomas Hal Phillip wrote everything for Hal Phillip Walker. All the political stuff was written by him because he had run his brother's campaign for governor in the state of Mississippi. Thomas Hal walked by, and Bob said to him, does this ever happen? And Thomas Hal said, all the time. And that was it. And then we proceeded with life as it was meant to be. But she was an extraordinary actress. And the thing that is a little heartbreaking about seeing this, so many of these actors and people involved in this process are no longer with us.
Well, she died very young.
Very young. Yeah, she had cancer very young. So
I understand when the film came out, originally there was a 3-hour and 30-minute cut that Altman had made, and that Paramount had shortened it to the length that it is now.
Actually, Paramount did not produce this.
No.
This was,
Or-
Bob had complete independence
Yeah,
for the first time.
independence, yeah.
So
And
this was his cut.
yes, it was first 4 hours, then it was 3.5, then now it's forever 2, but not quite.
2
as
hours and
forever.
40 minutes. To
Yeah,
be
well,
exact, yeah.
It's long. And so, but all those decisions were made by Bob.
I heard it was closer to 5.
That's
Did you see a longer cut?
I saw them all.
Every them.
Yeah.
What was your reaction to the finished movie?
I loved it. I mean, it's like watching a train wreck. And, you get on the train at the beginning and you simply go through it until the end. And having been involved with so many of the cuts, you sort of knew what was coming. But the impact of all that stuff that wasn't supposed to go together, going together, is pretty impactful.
Yeah, it was a huge hit. Was it big? It wasn't bigger than MASH, but
No,
it was.
No, not at all.
But it was quite a hit.
Well, it was
It
critical.
played forever
It did, but
because it played on the repertory circuit forever.
really,
You like
good.
the Landmark Theater chain? Sure.
That's nice. I
Yeah,
should
and we're
speak
still
to somebody
playing it.
about residual. No,
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. Yeah.
You get 2% of what we take in
Yeah,
tonight.
right, oh, cool. Good.
You lent me some photographs. I
Yes,
want
I
to.
did.
I don't know if these are actually on the set of Nashville, but it's you and Bob and Shelley. I think
Oh,
it might
yes,
have been
at the
thieves.
Cannes, it
But
was
let's take a look at
Thieves.
some of these photos. I'll
Oh,
show
boy.
them your hippie days.
Oh, gotcha. Oh, yeah.
Oh, you want to get? You
You
want
want me to move?
You don't have to.
Okay.
I think you know the photos.
I do
Yeah,
know
okay.
the photos I gave.
First one. There. Yeah.
Yes.
There you
This
go.
was at the Cannes Film Festival.
You're both wearing platform shoes.
Oh, God, yes.
And Bob is wearing double-toed shoes.
He was great fun, and he always took everybody to dinner. But he could be mean, too. I mean, he could get pissed off and be mean. But he was smart and funny. So You went back to work the next
Lily Tomlin said he was like Big Daddy, and he really does look like Big Daddy from Cat on a Hot Tin Roof.
Yes, he
Doesn't
does.
he?
Yes.
Next one. Is this Can with Thieves,
Yes,
or is this?
Thieves.
Oh, this is
Yeah,
Thief. Next
Thieves.
one, Raymond. And this is.
This is at the festival coming out of the screening. We had just screened Thieves, and Shelley and I decided to be twins in our matching.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Uh,
And that's Bob's wife, Catherine.
and Bob's wife, Catherine, the one that said, "Shaky morals, how are yours?"
Right.
Yes.
We had her here as a guest.
Yes.
With her book, beautiful book that she did
Yes,
with my
she
friend
did, yeah.
Julia Danielo. Next,
It's just more.
it's the same
same
scene.
scene. Yeah.
That's not Dustin Hoffman over there. There's
No.
Joan in the front. And this one is on, the next one is Nashville. And there you are with Geraldine.
Yep. That was the last. It was the last day of when we were shooting at the Parthenon. She
Charl-
was pregnant.
Really?
She was about
By Carlos.
She was about 3 months pregnant.
Charlie Chaplin saw the movie.
He did.
Yeah. Oh. And Una sent her, her mother, Una Chaplin, sent her. No, Daddy loved it.
Oh, that's
He
very
couldn't have
dear.
done it. And you showed it to Sigmund Freud's
Daughter.
Anna.
Yes. The first movie I directed was a documentary, which was about the Hampstead Center, which was the clinics run by Anna Freud and Dorothy Burlingham, who was the daughter of Louis Tiffany, and they lived together. And so Miss Freud said, "Well, what is the movie that you've been involved?" And I said, "Well, it's Nashville," and she said, "Well, I'd like to see it." I said, "Look, this is not going to be Fiddler on the Roof."
That was the only film she had seen. Fiddler on the
It was
Roof.
the only film she had seen.
Jerome Robbins choreography,
I know,
though.
I
Yeah.
know. So I arranged. I called. We made arrangements. We drove the ladies there. It was fabulous. So she saw the movie. I came back to London to start to work. The first day, I'm walking to work, and she's out in front with the dogs. She always had chows. So she's out in front with the dogs, and she said, "Do people really look like that in Nashville?" And I said, "Yes." Then we went in and sat down and had a discussion about every single character in the movie. I said, "You're right, you're right. No, that's not right. You're right, you're right." So she was.
Didn't she
liked
say
it.
her father would have loved it?
I don't know.
I read that somewhere.
Okay.
One more celebrity sighting.
Yes.
Richard Nixon wrote to Bob. You didn't know this?
No.
And there's a letter in Julia's book. It's not on White House stationery because it's post-Watergate. But he wrote to Bob in 1982 saying, "My daughter Julie says her favorite movie. Would you mind sending me a VHS copy?"
Jesus. Cheap son of a
Okay, we have time for a few more questions. Actually, we have all the time we want, but the subways may stop running. Okay.
Yes. What is the significance of the? They showed all the church services. I just wonder what the significance.
Yes, that was not in the script. And when you spent any time in Nashville, you realized in a very profound way how truly church-based it is, and how a lot of the music came out of that, and they're running Ken Burns' documentary now. And Bob was very quick to pick up that it was something that was missing. And when I see it, and I think it's because I didn't write it, I'm very moved by it, because it takes you into the sincerity of the ethos that is there, and that so much of the music came out of religious music in the very beginning of it. So that's how that happened.
But you did see gospel on one of your
Oh yes,
fact-finding missions.
the first, and that's why we have the gospel in the beginning. I was introduced to the guys that ran that particular recording studio, and so I would go there every day. The black music was incredible with that choir. They were amazing. So, and they generously would lead me to other things. Exit In mainly.
The exit in is where Keith sings "I'm Easy,"
Yes.
which is probably the scene most people remember. I think
Yeah.
so. He won the Oscar.
Yes.
Best. It was the only Oscar, wasn't it?
Yes.
Uh,
Bob was
and
mad.
Yeah. Well, who wouldn't be? You won an award from the L.A. Critics for
From
the
the
screenplay.
LA critics. I was grateful.
But Keith had written that song when he was 19. It wasn't
Yeah.
even written for the movie,
No,
and he
it
won
was
the
not.
Oscar. That must have been a
Oh,
nice surprise.
It was wonderful. No, it
And
was
you've
great for him.
you and Keith are still good friends, great
Very-
friends.
I see him a week from tonight in L.A. because they're screening Old Boyfriends.
Exactly.
So Talia's coming.
Right.
and
Well, we
Keith.
should say that your directorial debut, feature debut, was Old Boyfriends, which we're getting around the country, and it starred Talia Shire, Keith, and
John Belushi and Richard
and,
Jordan
and Richard Jordan.
and
yeah.
Buck Henry and John Houseman. And
John
it's-
Houseman.
Yeah. Wonderful. They were wonderful. Yeah.
The man who produced Citizen Kane.
Yeah. Yes.
There
Yes.
you go.
Thank you so much for writing it. I mean, this is clearly one of the greatest American films, made.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that made me want to be a filmmaker. So, thanks. So, I'm Jenny Livingston. Paris is Burning is my film that was here at the.
Oh, hi, Jenny.
Hi, Bruce.
I haven't seen you in.
So
We
this,
just had a huge hit with the revival of Paris. is Burning.
so this is a question, and I think you may have already sort of begun to answer it. But you said there are many versions of the script, and then many iterations in the cutting room. But how obviously, you have a vision, Bob had a vision. And the film is very prescient. The film to this day says something about who we are and who we're not, and it's very deep. But when you started to do that exploration and you and he started to talk about what it would be, and then it went through all these phases and you finally saw it, how close, how did you feel about the final version versus the, your original intentions?
The final version is exactly what I saw in my head when I was writing it. The great thing about working with Bob is that for whatever reason, you meet somebody where you're pretty like-minded. And yes, you have your disagreements, and he was far more aggressive about some things where I would pull back and be more subtle. And yes, you make compromises, but the essence of the finished film is exactly the essence of how I felt about it when the first draft was done and how I felt it would affect an audience, because sometimes you write something and it affects you, so you figure that there'll be a resonance. So I sort of, it was okay,
I was wondering if the characters came to you all at the same time, like a family, or if there was a seed character when you began. Did you see them all at once, or was
For me, the first character I wrote was Gwen Wells, because I knew that woman. And it was also because Bob, we talked a lot about fame. There's a scene in the very beginning of the movie where where the guy on television, I love him doing show and tell, and now the plane's coming, and now she's getting off the plane, she's waving, he's going blah, blah. But there's the young woman that comes in the background and holds up the sign and then gets enamored with the fact that she's on television. That was sort of what we had in mind in terms of fame and what you would do to be famous. So the first character that really settled was the Gwen Wells character, and then Opal, and then the men, The women came first, and everybody kept saying, well, it was a woman's movie. And I said, it's not a woman's movie. It is a story about people. It's interesting, especially now, what's being turned inside out in a lot of things, meanings of things. But this was really a single story without telling a single story, but every single one of those people was as important to this fabric of, it's what she just said, it's us. It's America, or some version of it. So.
But you did write some great women's stories for this movie.
Yeah, they were good.
I mean,
Thanks.
you once said they were all the same facets of the same diamond.
Yes.
Facets.
If you, the thing is, the character, I think there are 24 characters in the movie. You, the audience, are the 25th character. So that you are a participant. If you see this movie several times, you'll follow somebody different every time, simply because you're not in the mood for the other person,
You saw this tonight. Did you see anything you had never noticed before?
Of what I watched a lot were the real people in the backgrounds, because that's what we're kind of dealing with now. And so I watched all the crowd scenes tonight. And you watched who was engaged and who was out gone to lunch, and I am always sucked in by the music, you know. And then Gwen always breaks my heart. So
Well, it's a movie you can watch over and over again, and we've been reviving it here for over
Thank
30
you.
years, and we'll keep reviving it.
Thank you very
Thank you, Joan Tewkesbury.
Thank you for listening to Film Forum Presents. If you like what you just heard, please be sure to subscribe to get future episodes and rate and review so that more movie lovers can find us. Film Forum is an independent nonprofit cinema, and our doors have been kept open for nearly 50 years thanks to the invaluable support of our members and donors. Please visit www.filmforum.org for details on membership, as well as information and showtimes for our current programming. See you at the movies.